back to our journey to the human experience. My name is Akshay Nanavati. I am the founder of this show, and this is the show for you if you are an entrepreneur, an explorer, or an immortal. What do I mean by immortal? I'm often asked that question. I mean someone who wants to do something with their life, something of meaning, and live their passions to the fullest in order to then express that passion in service of others. So people whose legend will live far beyond their years, far beyond their lifetime even. And that's what I mean by immortal. People like Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, people who have done amazing things whose legend will live far, far beyond their time. And today's guest is someone who fits this criteria perfectly. He is my mentor and someone whose name I'm sure you recognize, Jack Canfield. He's the best-selling author of the Chicken Soup for the Soul series and the Success Principles. And you can check out his website here where he talks about Chicken Soup for the Soul. And you can read all about his events that he has, the hundreds of books that he has out, the products, the free resources. I mean, all kinds of stuff that will literally transform your life. He is truly a master in the art of success, and I highly recommend you check out his website. Sign up here to get his free resources, and I even recommend you check out his coaching services, his events. I've been to his events in person, and they are fantastic. They are truly transformational. So right after you check out this interview, go to his website, check out his products. I highly recommend getting the book, The Success Principles, as well. It's one of my favorite books, and I read a book a week, so I read a lot, and this one is high up there. It's one book I recommend to anyone that ever asks me about book recommendations. This interview is packed with million-dollar secrets on how to succeed. It's pure gold. Everything that he says in this interview is it's unbelievable. I highly recommend you go through every minute of this interview. It was so much content. It blew my mind. I got a ton out of it, and even though I've been to many of his events, it was still just amazing listening to him talk. So check it out, and without further ado, here is Jack Canfield. Hi, Jack. Thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. It is a real honor to have you on.
Well, my pleasure to be with you.
Awesome, great. So to get started, the first question is, a lot of people may not know this about you, that you started your career in an inner-city school in Chicago. So can you tell us a little bit about how you got from there to where you are today? How did you do that?
Well, there were a lot of steps.
I'm sure.
As I said, I think the basic answer is I kept following my heart. Whatever was interesting to me, whatever I found exciting, whatever attracted me, I just kept doing that. You know, there was a guy named Joseph Campbell back in the 60s and 70s who said, follow your bliss. And that's been pretty much my, mantra, if you will, throughout my life. So I started out teaching in a high school, and I was teaching all black inner city kids at the time. Got very involved in wanting to figure out how to motivate them because they weren't motivated to learn. So I was teaching history, but I became more interested in motivation than I was in history. And that led me to a man named W. Clement Stone, who basically had this technology called the Achievement Motivation System, where he had figured out how to motivate people to want to achieve more. So I took his class, and I learned a ton of stuff that I started applying in my school. And I was so good at it that they wanted me to start teaching other teachers. And so I did that. And then I ended up at a Job Corps center teaching kids who had dropped out of school, and I got even more into the motivational part. And then I met a guy named Dr. Sid Simon at a conference, and he said, you need to come back to the University of Massachusetts where we're really focusing on all of this and be a doctoral student. So I went back to graduate school, got a master's degree in education from there, and I started. Here's what happened. Actually, I ran out of all the cool courses to take at the university. All of a sudden, what was left was like statistics and German and research and all this. And that wasn't as much fun as all the stuff I was learning about communication and the self and meditation and all that. So I started an organization called the New England Center for Personal and Organizational Development, which sounds really heavy, but it was actually like a room we rented at the local Holiday Inn whenever we would run a workshop. And I was able to go to the workshops for free because I was putting them on because I didn't have any money as a graduate student to keep going out and taking seminars. So that's how I started my center. And eventually I met my wife, and she had a trust fund. So we were able to buy some land and actually buy a house and build another building on it. So it actually became a center. And while I was doing that, I wrote a book called 100 Ways to Enhance Self-Concept in the Classroom, which were all these techniques I learned about building self-esteem in kids. And then I took a training called Insight. And that's when I fell in love with large group training. This was the first time I'd ever been in a group with like 300 people and everybody transformed. I thought, wow, this is so much cooler than like 16 or 30 people at a time. So I sold my center. I moved to California. I became an insight trainer. And then about, I don't know, 2 or 3 years into it, I realized the guy that was running at the top was kind of like a cult leader. And so I had to leave and start my own company called Self-Esteem Seminars, which later morphed into the Canfield Training Group. Mm-hmm. And we started doing trainings all around the world. And then I wrote the first chicken soup book, and that changed everything. Yeah. And you probably know the story. It was rejected by 144 publishers. It took a year and a half to get it published. But when we finally did, with a lot of effort on our part, it took off. And all of a sudden now we had, I was a best-selling author. I was making millions of dollars a year. And we moved up to Santa Barbara and, just really started focusing on the book writing until about 3 years ago when I really started missing the large group trainings and refocused on that and started training trainers. And now my major focus is leadership training and training people to do the work I'm doing. So that's pretty much how it unfolded.
That is amazing. Yeah, that is an amazing story. And of course, as a participant in Breakthrough to Success and your Train the Trainer program, it is transformational. So I love every minute of it. And
thank you.
Yeah, of course. And I've seen, I've followed a lot of your work, and through your work, I've led to Jim Bunch. And I once saw one of his webinars where he said that 96% of people don't achieve their goals. And it sounds like, as in your story you just mentioned, that you've managed to create like almost everything that you ever wanted, and you've created all your goals. So
right.
What do you do differently in terms of actions that from other people who aren't able to, from that 96%, as well as in your mindset and that state of being? How have you able to develop that separates you from the 96%?
Well, to go back to quote Jim Bunch for a minute, he said, the three things that control your life are your mindset, your skill sets, and your environment. And so mindset is really critical. And I think when I worked with W. Clement Stone, he taught me this term called inverse paranoia, that you have to believe the world is plotting to do you well. Most people think the world's out to get them. And so if you're going to be paranoid, you can actually believe the world's out to get you in a good way. And so W. Clement Stone taught me to always believe that everything I wanted to do was possible. And he taught me to think bigger thoughts, dream bigger dreams, and to really believe that anything could be achieved if you set your mind to it. And I think so that was the first piece. And belief is a choice. I can wake up in the morning and I can believe you're going to be a nice person. I can believe you're going to be a negative person. And depending on how I believe that, that's going to affect my behavior. Someone once used this metaphor. If I told you that in the other room there's an alien and they're dangerous and they're hostile and they're here to take over and they're here to take advantage of us, and now your job is to go in the room and meet that person, versus I say, there's an alien in the other room and we've met them and they're friendly and they're loving and they're kind and they're here to support us and stop us from killing each other. Now you go in and meet them. You'd approach that alien very differently depending on your belief about who that alien was. Mm-hmm. And so our beliefs, just that little switch in belief changes our behavior. So I just chose to believe as a choice that I could achieve anything I wanted to achieve. Now, a lot of people believe it's a dog-eat-dog world. You can't get ahead if you're a woman, if you're black, if you're unemployed, if you're over 50, you don't have a degree, you're not connected enough, you don't know people. So I've always believed that whatever I wanted, I could create. I mean, since I was 21, I believed it. When I met Stone, it wasn't always. The second thing I've learned to do is to meditate. And I meditate every day, sometimes longer than others. And that meditation allows my mindset to be relaxed and calm and present to whatever shows up. Instead of being in a place of fear or in a place of negative thinking, it allows me to go back and touch into that universal self, call it God, source, energy, infinite intelligence, whatever you want to name it, that literally comes from that place of completion, of wholeness, of everything's fine just the way it is, and it's all unfolding as it should, including things that we see as challenges, as failures. They're part of our process of growth. Because I believe, actually, that it's not just being here to achieve things, it's here to grow ourselves. My definition of success used to be to create whatever. If you had the ability to create whatever result you wanted and you created it, you were a success. I believe now that our soul has a purpose, and that success is the fulfillment of our soul's purpose. And so with that belief and that understanding.
Yeah.
When I go into meditation, I'm able to tap in. It's kind of like calling up your boss and saying, hey, it's quiet now. I can hear the next set of instructions. And then I follow that inner guidance. I think the other thing that most people don't do, go back to your question, why don't most people fail and what do I do differently, is I study and I read a lot. And I read, I take seminars, I reread things I've read, my underlines, I outline stuff, I write. And I think writing is one of the greatest ways to clarify your ideas. So that's been useful. And I think the other thing is most people have never been taught how to be successful. We've been taught how to be a biologist, we've been taught how to be an engineer, but we've never been taught the principles and the strategies, the psychological things that we need to do in order to be successful. And as you know, in my book, The Success Principles, I captured 64 principles of success. One of my friends is a guy named Dr. Mark Hyman, and I was just with him 2 days ago, and he just finished with Katie Couric a week-long special on recreating our diets in America. And they spent a week with a family in South Carolina who were all overweight. Several had diabetes. And they literally did not know how to cut a vegetable. They didn't have a cutting board. They didn't have a sharp knife. When he brought vegetables into their home, they were using like a butter knife to try to cut it. And it wasn't that they were stupid. It's just that they were never exposed to that in their education. Their parents didn't know how to cook.
Yeah.
They weren't taught it in school. They were eating over 50% of their meals out were like Happy Meals at McDonald's. And so the idea is the same thing's true with principles of success. People have not been taught what they are. They're not taught in schools. And so if you don't, follow someone like you or watch your blogs or go to your website or read my book or take my seminar or whatever, most people never learn. Now that's changing with Google and with YouTube and with Tony Robbins and Brian Tracy and me and all these people being out there so much. The other things, I think, just the basic principles that most people don't have is they don't realize they need to take 100% responsibility for their lives, stop blaming and complaining. As soon as you blame and complain about somebody or blame someone else, you now feel like you're a victim, so you take less control, because if you realize you're 100% responsible, then you got to get off your butt and do something to change it. And the second thing is to have a purpose. What is your purpose in life? We can discover that through techniques and through visualization, through looking at what gives you the greatest joy, what are your talents, and so forth. Goals and vision. Most people never set goals. Only 3 to 4% of people in America, North America, and as my experience in Europe, I was just in Dubai and Oman and Bahrain and India, and I saw the same thing there. Very few people, if you say, what are your goals for this year? Very few people can tell you. And so the winners, this 3% club, has measurable, specific goals. And again, we weren't taught to do that in school. And most of our parents didn't do it with us and our family. Yeah. And the second thing is affirmations and visualization. Most people don't take about 3 to 4 minutes a day and close their eyes and visualize exactly what it is that they want to have in their life. And so that is a critical tool. Visionaries, we say visionaries like Donald Trump and Michael Dell and the people that started Google and so forth, they had a vision. And if you have a vision, then it guides your behavior. And the goals you set out of that vision keep you in momentum, let you know how you're doing, they keep you motivated to move. And then most of us have no training in how to develop states of being and support structures that keep us in action. Because all of we've talked about up until now is for naught if you're not in action. But how do we keep ourselves in action? How do we stay motivated? How do you reinforce yourself? How do you keep yourself up when you're down? This is where things like accountability partners, someone you talk to every day, it could be a coach, a manager, or a friend that's committed to your growth and you're committed to theirs. Mastermind groups, people that you get on the phone with every 1 or 2 weeks that you're talking with about your success. And then the ability to respond to feedback and the willingness to solicit the feedback so you know how you're doing. Most people don't know how they're doing. They get a quarterly review in their company. They say they're losing weight, but they're not weighing themselves. They're not keeping track of the calories or the amount of time they're meditating or the number of pages they're writing or dollars they're saving. So keeping score and then getting feedback so you know how you're doing. And then finally, I would say the last thing would be perseverance. How do you make sure that when the going gets tough, you still keep going?
Yeah.
So that's a lot, but those are all the things that I built into my life as mindsets, skill sets, and structures that keep me motivated, to keep me going no matter what's happening.
Yeah, that is invaluable input, and of course I've experienced some of it firsthand at your events, and it is truly astounding. So one of the things that I'm curious about, I heard you say that your new definition of success is about constant growth, and I heard in your seminars that you once said that self confidence is a result of successfully having survived a risk, and with self confidence and growth, I think I've heard you say that taking risks is necessary in order to grow. So
Yes,
in order to take risks, do you think that it's possible to eliminate fear when you take risks, that fear of the unknown, or is that part of the journey?
I don't think for most people it's possible to eliminate fear. Maybe if you're the Dalai Lama or Mother Teresa or someone who's extremely spiritually evolved, and that usually takes many many years. Or in the Dalai Lama's case, perhaps you reincarnate with that level of past life consciousness that you built. At least that's the story that we get told by them. Is that fear is part of the human condition, and we can learn how to see fear. There are some fears that are natural, like if you fall backwards, there's a natural fear response, and that stops you from falling back, hopefully. But most fear is self-generated, and the fear comes from imagining terrible things that haven't happened yet. So if I'm afraid I'm going to lose my job, I haven't lost my job yet. I'm imagining I'm going to lose my job, and then I feel the experience of fear in my body, because fear is a felt physical sensation in the body. However, it's created by your thoughts. And because we first experience it in our body, we think it's something that exists independent of our thoughts. But the fact is, if I imagine that, I'm going to lose my job, or I'm going to lose my mortgage, or people are going to laugh at me if I try to give a speech, and I imagine I'm going to forget my words, that's me making up future pictures. What Zig Ziglar called negative goal setting. You're imagining the outcomes you don't want. And what everyone in The Secret talked about, what all the law of attraction teachers teach, what everyone who understands the psychology of success teaches, is that we want to be using our ability to visualize and fantasize to visualize positive outcomes, to visualize the result we want instead of the fear that we don't want. So the first thing is, when you find yourself afraid, is to ask yourself, how am I scaring myself? What am I imagining? I just worked, before I got on this call with you, I was on a call with a woman from Ireland. She's a student of mine who's going to be flying to Bali to take one of my workshops coming up, because we're doing this exotic, kind of journey to Bali, and there'll be a workshop built into it. And she's got a fear of flying, or had one up until about 10 minutes ago. And so we were using EFT tapping to tap through this fear. Her fear was around not being on the plane, but when turbulence happens, she starts imagining the plane's going to fall apart and go down and crash. And so we were able to have her create a new image and say, "Oh, this is a fun ride, like like the Magic Mountain at Disney World." And so all of a sudden, we get an extra thrill that they throw in for free. We didn't even charge us for it, and so we can go whoopee and enjoy it. So we reframed that and created a new image of enjoyment rather than a fear of falling. And then we use something called EFT, or tapping. There are some wonderful techniques to get rid of deep-seated fear. Some fears come from trauma. If you were raped by a person from a certain ethnic group as a child, perhaps if you see someone like that in a bar or on the street walking close behind you, that re-stimulates that fear, because it's very similar input that's coming into what happened when you were raped. So we can use techniques like tapping, where you tap on these acupuncture points while you're saying fear of being raped, or fear of falling, or fear of losing my job, whatever, and we can get rid of that. There are a number of techniques, self-hypnosis, the Sedona method, where people can go in and get rid of the fear. There's also a technique, if it's not a huge fear, it's like maybe it's just a fear that if I call up someone and invite them to participate in my downline in my multi-level company, they're going to reject me and hang up. That kind of fear, we just say, feel the fear and do it anyway. So we have a little mantra we teach people. You may remember it goes, "Oh, what the heck? Go for it anyway." And the idea that some fears are just meant to be pushed through. And like, I'm afraid to go up and ask that girl for a date. Well, feel the fear and do it anyway. The fear should be considered to be a stop sign, a caution sign, not a stop sign. So pay attention, be on your best behavior, make sure you're noticing all the cues in the environment. But in general, stop imagining the negative outcome You can use tapping, just called EFT. I've written a book called Tapping into Ultimate Success, which teaches that. And then the other thing is if you scale let's say for me that I know that I have an opportunity, if I call this company and enroll them in my program, I can make a $30,000 consulting fee. But that's too scary because it's IBM or it's Microsoft or it's Google. What I could do is call up a friend I know and ask them if they would enroll in my seminar. And that's someone that's less scary. So we always say scale down the experiment.
Yeah.
Instead of going and asking the most beautiful girl in the world for a date, ask someone that's more normal looking to start out with. And when they say yes, it builds your self-confidence. Because as you said, self-confidence is the result of a successfully survived risk. Mm-hmm. So if the risk is too big, it's way up here, make the risk a little smaller so it's not quite so difficult.
Yeah, got it. Those are great techniques, and I'm just curious, because in your career, you've done the whole list of successes. It's way too long to even list right now, but from all the chicken soups and now the Transformation Leadership Council you started, the Train the Trainer programs, and your Breakthrough to Success, the various seminars you run, do you still have that experience of fear when you create something new in whether it's a new book that you're writing or a new seminar? Do you still experience that, and how do you handle it using some of the techniques maybe you mentioned? Or
well, I don't have a lot of fear anymore. I'm 68 years old and I've experienced most things in life and I've survived every one of them. So yeah. I always say that wisdom comes from surviving, and the more you survive, the less fear you have, because it's just called, well, we've been there before. But I still get scared sometimes. Like the first time I gave a talk on self-esteem to the LAPD, the Los Angeles Police Department, I was afraid they might think I was a little soft, a little woo-woo, whatever. And so I got a little nervous with that. I get nervous if I'm presenting at the National Speakers Association, because these are all my peers, people that are the best of the best in the industry. And so if I'm talking to a local group of housewives in Santa Barbara, I know a lot more than them. But when I'm talking to a group of people who are in the same business I am, do I really have anything useful to say? So I can start scaring myself by imagining that, maybe they're going to be bored or something. Yeah. What I will do is two things. I will imagine myself having given the talk and I'm getting a standing ovation. So again, I go toward the positive outcome I want. I can tap, fear of rejection, using the tapping technique. I can meditate, which I'll often do, just go inside, connect with what is my reason for doing this. See, one of the things I've learned, if your why is bigger than your fear, you'll do it. I don't know if you have children, but let's say you did. Let's pretend you had a 2-year-old kid and you really loved him, and you're outside and you realize your house is on fire. Now, normally people don't run into houses on fire. That's called smart. And the fear is I'm going to get burned up. But if you knew your son was in his bedroom and he was asleep in his bed, you'd run into the house, because your why now of why I'm running into this house is bigger than my fear. So, you see people that are fearless usually have huge causes they care about. Whether it was Charles Schwab creating, Charles Schwab company so that people could invest for less money, or the guy that started Southwest Airlines so that people could fly around the country that didn't have a lot of money and were on business accounts, or, Mother Teresa, who wanted to get rid of the poverty in Calcutta. She felt like every person she was healing was God, because if we are all one, it is. And so her cause was bigger than her fear. She would go out and get wars to stop so she could pull people from an orphanage out of the war zone. And she would go right into the war zone and say, you need to stop shooting. And she was so fearless and had no agenda, people would do it because they knew she wasn't trying to get anything from them. She wasn't trying to hurt them. So her why was so big that she was fearless. So again, you can ask yourself, well, why do I want to do this? And what's the ultimate payoff that's worth, expending the time and effort for?
Yeah, got it. Oh, I love that. That's great. And another thing that I'm really curious about, your insight is, so my company that I started, I call it Human Potential Development. And I was wondering, from your experience, I know, from your varied experiences all over the world and the success you've been able to create, what do you think reveals the human potential at its finest, at its best? Like, what does that look like for you?
Well, I go back to the fact that I think everybody has an inborn purpose. And everybody has a set of talents that are given to you because they're the talents you need to fulfill that purpose. Like little kids you see that have to sing. You can see these people on American Idol, and they're always showing videos of them when they were 2 with, singing into their hairbrush.
Yeah.
And then maybe they got a little toy microphone set, and then you see them singing at church, and then they're in the school play, and they can't not sing. And their purpose is to inspire and uplift through music. You see people, my stepson was someone who had to build, tinker toys and logs and, cutting up stuff and making things. And then when computers came along, he had to go in and program computers and make games and do videos. And it was just part of his DNA. So when people do the thing they're born to do, then you end up with music by Mozart and Beethoven and Bach. You end up with art by Picasso and Modigliani and people like that. You end up with buildings that are, developed by I.M. Pei and beautiful architects. You end up with inventions like, the Apple computers and the iPhone, because people are doing the thing they're passionate about. And so I think whether it's great music, great poetry, great architecture, great interior design, great clothing design. I just was with a guy named David Wagner, who wrote a book called Life as a Daymaker. And he's a hairstylist. And he's someone who played hockey in high school. He's married and he's got kids. He's totally, when you first meet him, you'd think he was gay, because a lot of hairstylists are. But the fact is, he just loves to make beautiful hair. And I've seen his before and after pictures, and he was in the Midwest in Minnesota, and he takes these homely people, and they look like they're on the cover of a fashion magazine. Their self-esteem goes up. They feel better about themselves. One woman came in to get her hair done because she was going to get married, and after her haircut, she went and she called off the marriage because it was the first time she felt so good about herself that she wasn't going to marry someone who was abusing her. So, I mean, it doesn't matter what your profession is. I mean, people that are housekeepers, if they're really into it, they just create beauty out of chaos every week when they come in to clean your house. So I think that we see the human spirit becomes generous, becomes creative, is willing to take risks, because all great art, all great architecture, all great interior design, people are trying things that have never been tried before. And it's the willingness to put yourself out there like you and I do with books, with seminars, with teaching, with coaching, with blogs, with interviews like this, because we don't know what's going to happen. We trust it's going to work. But it's always a risk. I mean, you and I have certainly stepped on stage and said something that fell flat, and you learn not to do that again. That joke worked, that didn't. But it takes the willingness to risk and the care. You love people enough that you're willing to do it for them.
Yeah, got it. That's great. That makes a lot of sense. So finally, I don't want to take up too much of your time again. So final two questions is if you could go back and do something differently, what would you do differently to what's a lesson, something you can share that you would do differently from your past experiences? And also, what is something that people who finish watching this interview, what's a next step people should go take after they watch this in order to create success in their lives? Whatever, as you said, whatever purpose or profession they have for themselves.
Well, let's take it one step at a time. I think the biggest kind of lessons I've taken away from life, one is I would have written sooner. I think that in our world, once you have a book, people take you more seriously, and you can reach people you can never reach by speaking or even on the internet. Someone hands somebody a book, someone picks up a book in a library. We have a story of a woman who was homeless in Ohio, and literally homeless, and she was pregnant, and it was January, and she was cold, and she used to dumpster dive behind the McDonald's in order to find leftover food to eat, and she would go into the library to get out of the cold. And they would throw the homeless people out of the library if you weren't reading something, because then they thought you were just in there to get warm, which they were. And they were afraid other patrons wouldn't come in because maybe you hadn't taken a shower and so forth. And she walks into the library, and the thing I have to tell you is that she was planning to kill herself. She had set the date. She was going to wait till her baby was born. She was going to give it to a friend of hers to take to the hospital and basically say, this is an abandoned child, you need to find parents for it. There's a train that goes through that town every day at 2:30 in the afternoon. She was going to lay down right in front of it when it was too close to stop and kill herself because she was so miserable, so depressed, so cold, so hopeless. And she walks into the library, and there's a table of books that says inspiration. And she just reaches out without even looking, picks up a book, and walks to the back of the stacks in order to not get thrown out of the library. Well, the book she picked up was Chicken Soup for the Soul. And she started to read it. And as she read it, she read about a boy who had a leg that was, he was crippled, and he was wearing a big brace on his leg. And there was a dog that he ends up adopting because the dog limped. He had a hip dysplasia, and he ended up adopting this dog because he said the dog needs someone who understands because I've got the same kind of leg. And as she's reading the story, it's she for someone that would love that dog. There's probably someone out there who would love me. And so she decided not to commit suicide. She ended up going and starting to get educated. She got off of welfare. She bought a home. She started a business. And now she runs a halfway house for people on the street to get them off the street, all because of a book. And so basically, I now know that, both for me and my career, my wealth, my impact, I would have written much earlier. So if you're anyone who's thinking of writing, just do it. You just write 30 minutes a day. I call it vomit copy. Whatever comes out, just put it on paper. You can go back and edit it later, but you're going to start building. If you wrote a page a day at the end of the year, you'd have 365 pages of insights, wisdom, how-to, a novel, whatever it might be, memoir. So that's one thing I would say. The other thing I think is I learned what I would say marriage skills later than I would have liked. Learning how to listen, learning how to be with people, learning how to not have to be right, learning how to compromise, surrender, spend time with, etc. And so, it cost me a divorce when I was younger. And so I would have learned what I would call how to be a great spouse a lot sooner. Because I think, I was so focused on my career, it cost me in terms of my family, both my wife and my kids. And I would have meditated sooner. I didn't learn to meditate until I was about 35 years old. And I wish someone had taught me when I was in high school. I think I would have had a much happier life. So I think those are some things that I wish I had learned earlier. Your second question, I think, was about what's
the next step for someone watching this? Like, what's the first step they should go take?
Well, this will sound self-serving, and I'll give you two because the first one sounds self-serving, but literally, if you haven't read my book, The Success Principles, I would encourage you to do that. Here's why. That book is kind of like a manual that I wrote with the purpose of if you only could read one book your whole life on success, what would it be? So it's a big book. It's a thick book. It has 64 principles in it, lots of activities, lots of strategies. And everyone who's read that book has had a transformation in their life. Relational, physical, sports. I'm interviewing a guy later this week who was homeless in Saudi Arabia, homeless in Saudi Arabia. He read my book. Someone gave him a copy of the book. He read the book. This is a year and a half ago. He now has a $1 billion company with 700 employees, and he's getting married. He wasn't in a relationship, and he invited me to his wedding 2 days ago. And it's because he read the book. And then after about 3 months of having read the book, he signed up for our coaching program, and he got coached through the place where now he's got the relationship going with the marriage. So I know how powerful that book can be. Mm-hmm. And lastly, I would say on a more general basis, if there was one thing you could do to get started, it would be sit down and act as if you could have anything you want in your life and write out your ideal life. Take a half hour and write down what your ideal relationships would look like, your ideal health, your ideal home, your ideal job, your ideal friends, your ideal vacations, every aspect of your life. And then pick one thing in there that's not happening now and commit to spend the next 30 days taking one action step every day that would make that come true. Whether it's reaching out and asking someone how to do it, reading a book about it, creating a plan about it, starting to save money, even if it's $1 a day, starting the exercise, joining a gym, going out and meeting people, posting on Facebook, joining Match.com, but do something every single day for 30 days that would move you toward the completion of one of those things being real in your life. And if you were to do that every day, and then after you've completed that, pick another one, pick another one, pick another one. And as you get stronger, then you can work on multiple goals at the same time. You can exercise in the morning, meditate after that, work on your diet, take one person to lunch every day so you can build your friendship base. But start slow, get some success, and as you see it's working, then begin to move it out.
Got it. This has been absolutely invaluable. Your advice, as always, of course, as a person who's been through all your seminars and, I consider you my mentor, of course, your advice is amazing, and it's changed my life. So I highly recommend the book, of course. It has changed my life since I've started working with you. So thank you so much again for being here. It has been an absolute honor to speak with you and share your wisdom with my audience on my show. Really appreciate it, Jack.
Well, you're very welcome. You're one of the people I said you reminded me when I was young, so I'm glad to support you any way I can.
Oh, wow, that's a real compliment. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
You're
It's a real
welcome.
honor. I hope you all enjoyed the interview as much as I did. It was packed with really good tips on things you can do right now, starting today, to create the success you want in your life. And that's why I just love talking to Jack every time I'm around him. I learn so much. It was an amazing experience just having the opportunity to speak with him. So check out his site. Be sure to get the Success Principles. Like I said before, that is the best book you will read in terms of personal development and how to manifest the success you want in your life. It's an amazing book. If you have any questions for me, feel free to post in the comments below. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you thought about this interview. What was your most valuable tip that you got out of it? And write down what you're going to go do or what you did. I would love to hear how you implemented some of the tips that Jack suggested and the success you achieved as a result of that. So I look forward to hearing all about that. Look forward to continuing our journey towards success together. And I can't wait to see you again next week in another amazing episode of our journey to the human experience. And until we meet again, remember, life is your playground. Go play it with joy and passion.